I want you to imagine waking up from open-heart surgery and discovering that while you were unconscious, someone had rearranged your entire financial life. Not stolen it exactly, not emptied the accounts and run, something more sophisticated than that. Rearranged it, quietly, over years, in a way designed to be invisible to everyone except the kind of person who checks the original source documents against the summaries. The kind of person I happen to be. My name is Lorraine. I'm 67 years old. For 35 years, I worked as a forensic accountant, the person companies call when they suspect the numbers are telling a different story than the people presenting them. I have testified in federal court. I have reviewed documents that made federal prosecutors sit down slowly and take a breath. I am, professionally, not easy to fool. And yet, for 12 years, my mother-in-law Constance managed to run a quiet restructuring of the finances my husband Frank and I had spent 3 decades building because she had one advantage no fraudster in a courtroom ever had. She had Frank's trust, and she had my hospital room. I want to take you back to 2011 first, because the story doesn't start with the fraud. It starts, the way these things always do, with something that seemed like help. Frank and I had been married 26 years when my heart gave us its first warning. Not a full event, a serious arrhythmia that put me in the hospital for a week and resulted in a conversation with a cardiologist that I did not enjoy. The upshot was, I needed surgery, I needed recovery time, and for a period of months, I was going to be significantly less than fully functional. Constance offered to help. I should tell you about Constance so you understand what help meant from her. She was a formidable woman, 70 at the time, widowed young, self-made in the most literal sense. She had run the family hardware business after her husband Harold died in the 1980s, kept it profitable for 15 years, and sold it at precisely the right moment. She was sharp, organized, and accustomed to being the most competent person in any room she entered. She also believed, with a conviction that no amount of evidence ever dented, that Frank's marriage to me had been a strategic error. Not that she disliked me personally. She simply felt, and she had communicated this at various volumes over the years, that Frank deserved someone less focused on career and more focused on family. That my work travel was excessive, that my opinions were too frequent at family dinners, that I was, in a word she never quite used but always implied, difficult. Frank loved his mother. He was a good man, a gentle man, and like many gentlemen, he had spent his childhood learning to smooth things over. When Constance had a concern, Frank addressed it. When Constance had a preference, Frank considered it carefully. He was not weak. He was kind. There is a difference. But kindness, when directed at a person who knows how to use it, can become a door that opens from the outside. So when Constance offered to help manage things while I recovered, Frank thought this was generous. I had reservations. I expressed them once, mildly, because I was about to have surgery and I was tired and I did not want to spend my preoperative days fighting. Frank assured me it was temporary, just a few months, just bills and basic account management, just until I was back on my feet. I said fine. I should not have said fine. The surgery went well. Recovery was longer than expected, 8 months in total before I was cleared to return to any significant cognitive load. Constance had expanded her involvement during that time in the way that a temporary solution, given enough time, becomes a permanent one. She paid the bills. She managed the brokerage statements. She had a conversation with Frank about simplifying their financial picture that resulted in 3 accounts being consolidated into one joint family account to which Constance had co-signatory access. Frank told me about the consolidation after it happened. I nodded. I was still very tired. I filed the information away in the part of my brain that was not yet back at full capacity. And then, slowly, I got better. And when I got better, I went back to my work and to our finances, and I started, the way I always do, by reading every original document I could find. What I found took me 6 months to fully map. I want to be clear about something. Constance did not steal money in the way you might imagine. No large sums vanished to an offshore account. No obvious transactions disappeared from the ledger. What she had done was more refined, the kind of financial restructuring that is designed to be invisible to the person it's being hidden from, while remaining perfectly legible to the person directing it. She had moved our long-term retirement assets, the accounts Frank and I had built over 30 years of 2 professional incomes, into a family trust structure. A structure that had been drawn up by an attorney Constance had retained. Not one Frank or I had ever met. a structure in which Constance held trustee authority during her lifetime, with Frank as successor trustee, and in which my interest as Frank's spouse was, through a series of provisions that took me 2 weeks to fully parse, contingent rather than vested. She had, in other words, taken our retirement savings and placed them in a structure she controlled, under terms that protected her family line, using Frank's signature on documents he had not fully understood. I knew Frank hadn't fully understood because I knew Frank. He is a historian. He has a doctorate in 18th century American architecture. He is brilliant in his field and openly, cheerfully lost in any document that uses the word grantor more than twice. He signs things I explain to him. He does not independently parse trust provisions. Constance knew this too. She had known it his whole life. The restructuring had been done during my recovery, over 4 separate transactions, each one small enough to seem routine and large enough to matter. The attorney she'd used was legitimate. She wasn't a fool. But he had been given a mandate by a client who had presented herself as acting for the family, and he had drawn up what she'd asked for. Attorneys are not investigators. They draft what clients instruct. I sat with the full picture for 3 days before I said a word. This is the part people always ask me about. Why didn't you react immediately? Why didn't you confront her right then? Because I've spent 35 years learning that the first person to react loses the information advantage. The moment Constance knew I understood what she'd done, she would begin protecting herself. Documents would be clarified, conversations would be reframed, Frank would be prepped. I had one opportunity to map the full scope before anyone knew I was mapping. So I mapped. I pulled every statement from every account for the prior 8 years. I pulled the trust documents and read them 4 times. I pulled the original brokerage records from before the consolidation and constructed a full before and after picture. I located the attorney who drafted the trust and researched his practice. I documented every transaction, every date, every signature. At the end of 3 days, I had a complete picture of a 12-year financial rearrangement, because as I dug, I found that this wasn't the first time Constance had restructured things. There had been a smaller, earlier adjustment in 2008, during a period when Frank had been dealing with a significant professional crisis, and I had been traveling extensively for a federal case. That one I'd missed at the time, absorbed into the general financial noise of a complicated year. This time, I had caught up to all of it, and I had caught something else too. Constance had gifted money from the family trust, our retirement assets, now under her control, to Frank's younger sister, Patricia. Not enormous sums, consistent ones. Annual gifts, carefully sized to stay just below the federal gift tax reporting threshold. 12 years of gifts. Patricia was not a trustee. Patricia was not a beneficiary of any instrument Frank and I had ever agreed to. Patricia was, however, Constance's preferred child, the one who lived nearby, who called every day, who had given Constance 3 grandchildren and 30 years of proximity. The gifts were, legally, within the trustee's discretionary authority as the trust had been written. Constance had been careful about that. The attorney had given her real discretion, and she had used it, consistently, for 12 years, to transfer portions of Frank's and my retirement wealth to his sister. I thought about that for a very long time. Then I called my own attorney. She was a trust and estate specialist I'd worked with professionally on several cases. Her name was Gwen. She had 30 years of experience and an expression that never changed, and when I walked her through what I'd found, she sat with it quietly for a moment, and then said, "Lorraine, how complete is your documentation?" "Complete," I said. "Originals?" "Certified copies of everything that matters. Originals where I have them." She nodded once. "Then you have a case for breach of fiduciary duty, undue influence on your husband's execution of the trust, and potentially a gift tax reporting violation, depending on how the IRS characterizes the transfers to Patricia. You also have a possible fraudulent transfer claim if the trust was established with intent to disadvantage your marital interest." She paused. "That's a lot of fronts," she said. "I know," I said. "I've been deciding which ones I actually want to open." Because here is the thing about having a complete case. Having it and filing it are different decisions. Filing means years of litigation. Frank in the middle of a war between his wife and his mother, Patricia dragged into something she may or may not have fully understood. A family torn along every seam. I didn't want that. What I wanted was the retirement savings Frank and I had built, returned to the form we'd intended them to take. What I wanted was for Constance to understand that I had seen everything she'd done. So I made a different choice. I arranged a meeting. Just the 4 of us, me, Frank, Constance, and her attorney, at a neutral location. I told Frank the night before what I'd found. All of it. I sat with him for 3 hours and walked him through every document because he deserved to know the full truth before we sat down with his mother, and because I needed him to walk into that room with clear eyes. He was quiet through most of it. That's how Frank processes things. He goes still, and then he goes very still, and then he comes back. At the end, he said only, "She never asked me if this was what I wanted." "No," I said, "she didn't. She assumed I'd want what she wanted." "Yes." He thought about that for a long time. Then he said, "Show me where I signed to fix it." I told him it wasn't that simple, but that we were going to make it as close to that as possible. The meeting with Constance was not what I had expected, and I'd run a lot of depositions, so my expectations were fairly calibrated. She came in prepared. Her attorney was good, quiet and experienced, the kind of man who doesn't let his client run ahead of him. Constance herself wore her best armor. Calm, reasonable, the practiced composure of a woman who has managed difficult situations her entire professional life. For the first 20 minutes, she reframed. The trust had been established for tax efficiency. The consolidation had simplified management. The gifts to Patricia had been discretionary trustee decisions within the instrument's terms. Everything had been done properly and with Frank's knowledge. I let her finish. Then I placed my documentation on the table. Not all of it, just the comparative analysis, the before and after of our retirement position, the gift log with dates and amounts, and one particular document that I had saved for this moment. The 2008 adjustment. The one that had happened when I was traveling and Frank was distracted. The one that predated the trust, that had moved assets in a direction Constance could have told me about and had chosen not to. Constance's attorney looked at the 2008 document for a very long time. Constance looked at me. "You went back that far," she said. It wasn't a question. "I went back to the beginning," I said. "That's the job." Her attorney asked for a recess. They were gone for 45 minutes. When they came back, his face had changed in the specific way faces change when a client has acknowledged something in a private room that they hadn't acknowledged before. We spent 3 hours negotiating. Not litigating, negotiating. Because Constance, ultimately, was not a stupid woman, and stupid is the only kind of person who fights a forensic accountant with 35 years of testimony experience over documents she has already fully reconstructed. The terms we reached were these. The trust would be restructured by a neutral estate attorney. My marital interest would be restored to its vested form. The discretionary gifting authority would be removed. The prior gifts to Patricia were addressed through a promissory structure, not clawback, because that would have required litigation and harmed Patricia, who had taken the gifts in good faith without understanding their source, but an offsetting arrangement that rebalanced the family's asset distribution over time. Constance's attorney prepared the documents. I reviewed them with Gwen. Frank signed them, this time having read every word, with me beside him. The IRS question, the gift tax reporting. I let go. Not because I couldn't have raised it, but because raising it would have extended the process by years and harmed people beyond Constance, and what I wanted was the specific outcome, not the maximum damage I could cause. A forensic accountant learns the difference between those two things very early, or she doesn't last. Constance and I have not had a warm relationship since. We are not enemies. We see each other at family events. She is gracious and careful, and we discuss neutral things. The marble in her voice when she talks to me has a different quality now, not the old condescension, not warmth either, something more like awareness. She knows what I know, she knows that I know it fully, and she knows that I chose a resolution over a reckoning, which is a kind of power she didn't previously know I held. Frank and I celebrated our 40th anniversary the following spring. We went back to the same inn where we'd spent our honeymoon, and we ate dinner slowly and talked the way people talk when they've been through something hard together and come out on the other side of it still facing the same direction. He said, at some point in the evening, "I should have asked more questions." "You trusted your mother," I said. "I should have asked more questions," he said again. I didn't argue. He was right. But I also didn't add to it, because Frank carrying unnecessary guilt is not an outcome I ever wanted. He had been used by someone he loved, and the person responsible for that was not him. "You had the right wife," I told him instead. He laughed, and that was enough. Thomas, our son, heard the full story eventually. He processed it in his characteristic way, which is to say, he sat quietly for a moment and then said, "What I don't understand is why she thought she could do this to a forensic accountant." I've thought about that question many times. The honest answer is, she didn't think of me as a forensic accountant. She thought of me as Frank's wife, the difficult one, the career one, the outsider who had never quite fit the Callaway mold. She had a category for me, and in that category, I was someone who could be managed, who could be quietly worked around, who would be too distracted by grief and recovery and the ordinary demands of life to read every original document against every summary. She was not wrong about who I am. She was simply wrong about what that means. I've spent 35 years finding the truth in documents that were designed to tell a different story. I never stop reading. I never stop checking. I never assume the summary matches the source, and I never, not once in 35 years, stop at the number someone else hands me. Because the numbers don't lie. The people presenting them sometimes do. My father taught me that, actually. He was an auditor. He used to say, "Trust the ledger, verify the story." I married a man who trusted stories, which is one of the things I love about him. And when someone used that trust against him, I went back to the ledger. Every page, every year, every line. Constance underestimated what happens when you hand a forensic accountant a 12-year discrepancy and 8 months of recovery time. It turns out what happens is a complete picture. And a complete picture, in the right hands, is everything. If you've ever had to fight to protect what you and your partner built together, you know exactly what this felt like. Share this with someone who's been underestimated in their own home. And subscribe, because next time, the story goes even further back, and the paper trail goes even deeper.